All right. Well, good evening, gentlemen, and welcome. We are here at the library, and this is a bit of a different forum. I've done this before where it was more of a debate because there was, people running for the same office. And as I said to you before the camera started, unless one or the other of you move out of town, we will be celebrating your candidacy and your victory next week. So thank you from all of us for doing this job. It's you both have been elected to office, you as a selectman, you as planning board, and so you know what you're getting into, which is really nice. We're getting two selectmen that understand what is involved in the job. You'll have to learn a couple of new tricks, but I'm sure you're very able to do that, and so welcome. There are some people that don't know you, and I can't imagine how that happened, but I believe it to be true. So why don't you just take a minute, introduce yourself, and give the elevator speech on who you are and why in God's name you decided to do this.
After you, Mike.
Sure,
Mike,
I'm happy to. I'm Michael McGee. I've been on the select board now for 2 years. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I also have a day job. I am a prosecutor in Norfolk County. I've been doing that since 2011. And I have a wonderful family. My wife, Amanda, and my 2 children, Maggie and Abigail, are in the schools. And they are gracious enough to allow me to do this every Monday night and several other nights as well. And it's a big commitment for them as much as it is for me. So I'm gracious that they allow me to do this. And I did get into this right around the middle of the pandemic, I would say. And, in some, I felt like it was important to get off the bench, to not just be a Monday morning quarterback and say, oh, this is, I could be involved, I could help. I live right I live right near town hall. I advocate for people all day long, and I enjoy it. I enjoy serving, and I really felt that like my tools as being an advocate, and having that empathy for people, regular people, that I could use those tools and be effective in our town government. And I think it's worked well. I think that as a board, we've worked as a team. We've really been transparent, worked together to make sure that the community's voice is heard on issues that are important to them, and that we can take information and get it out to them. I think asking questions and things like that, and I know you've been on the board, I think that's really important.
One thing that you think in the last 2 years that you've done that made a difference?
Made a difference. There's a couple of things that jump out at me. First one that jumped out at me would be we had an awful storm, the nor'easter. And actually,
this is not a trick question.
I know there's a couple of good ones.
You've already won, Mike. So just tell us.
Well, there's a couple of things that are near and dear to my heart. And one was that, and we do have this position where we can hold folks accountable.
Mhm.
And Eversource dropped the ball with that storm.
Okay.
It affected families across the town. And it impacted their lives, their families. They were uprooted for a number of days, and there were mistakes that were made. And we brought them in, and we used our tool as a board to hold them accountable, to allow our fire chief to hold them accountable, and bring that into a public forum. And although we don't know what the future will hold as far as storms, they came in, they answered our questions. And when the next storm happened, they were back and they brought their special truck, and they had 3 of them for the state. And they had it right there front and center. They've done a ton of tree work around town, and spent probably millions of dollars on that. I'm sure it passed forward into some of our rates, but nevertheless, we've gotten a lot of.
You got their attention.
We got their attention. We used our position to bring that to light. And I think it had a big impact on folks, because I know that during that storm and rainy and all of us were getting phone calls, and it was really important to us to kind of not just say, well, this is just a bad storm. This is just a mistake. We held them accountable. We brought them in. So that's just one example.
I think that's a great one.
So
That's a great one. Brian, everybody should know you, but you're not as photographed or on TV up until now, although you're very photogenic, so it's going to be good. But, tell us, introduce yourself and tell folks a little bit about yourself.
Happy to. Before we begin, I want to thank the DFL, the trustees, you, Betsy, Lester, Shannon, and Martha, of course, for hosting tonight, bringing us to your living rooms and computer screens. I'm Brian Glennon. I'm a resident of Colonial Drive, longtime member of the planning board, former municipal attorney, and currently I'm a business attorney. I was general counsel and vice president of a well-known New England corporation. I'll leave the name out to protect the innocent. I'm very interested in public service, always have been. I'm a big fan of municipal government in particular, as my prior service as a municipal attorney would attest to. I think a community is only as good as the people who step up and do the work. There was a great piece in the Clipper today. They were kind enough to take a candidate statement from me. And as I mentioned in there, we didn't get here by accident. We have great folks like Mike and Ted Flynn, of course, and others on the board, Betsy, yourself, folks who blazed the trail and made Duxbury a place where people want to live. People move here not because it's convenient to get to anywhere else. We move here for the lots of different reasons. And it takes a lot of thought, a lot of work. And one of the reasons I ran for the planning board originally, and why I stayed on the planning board for about a dozen years, is to help with the long-term vision of the town. And we were really fortunate back in 2017, where town meeting was kind enough to afford us some resources to update the comprehensive plan that hadn't been done since 1999.
Right.
And we engaged many, many residents. In fact, we had a survey that had about 1,500 residents who provided input. MAPC, which was helping us with the project, said that was one of the biggest turnouts they had for a community and all the comprehensive plans they did. So we certainly had great community input. And I think it's important to not only understand what the town folks want, but then actually implement it. And that's one of the big reasons why I'm running for the select board, leaving the planning board. My term's expiring. So I had to run for re-election or do something else. And this opportunity presented itself, which was serendipitous in a way, because it allows me a great opportunity to take what I've been working on for the past few years by way of the comprehensive plan, and now help it get started, as it's getting its legs under it. And I think this is a great chance to work with colleagues such as Mike and Amy, and certainly Cindy, as former colleagues of mine on the planning board,
Sure.
are well-versed in the comprehensive plan as well. So I think we have a great team assembled.
Now, I feel strongly that your service in other areas was extremely valuable. And just to kind of balance it, what do you feel? What's the best thing you think you did on planning board? What is the thing that pops to mind that you feel really good about?
Comprehensive plan, no question about it.
Yeah,
It's a big deal.
It is a big deal. It is a big deal. And in my my work life, I go through a lot of communities. I see a lot of other towns, and I've always felt that we have a very vocal community, and but they're also knowledgeable, and we try to give them the tools, and that's a really good tool. You're absolutely right.
Oh, I almost forgot. I also want to thank my wife, Helen, my son, Brian, who's a freshman at Syracuse,
Oh, there you
DHS
go.
alumnus.
There you go.
My daughter, Sarah, is a junior at DHS.
Oh, that's
So we're
great.
very, very, very proud of our kids and the Duxbury Public School System for sure.
Yeah, well, there you go. It isn't the Oscars, so you're good. You're not in trouble. Okay, so we are, as I said before, we're a community of passions, of opinions. We feel strongly about things, not always the same thing. The one unifier, I think, that you see with people when they come to the town, new, when they've grown up here, whatever stage of life it is Duxbury Beach. It defines us in many ways, and I think it unites us and divides us all in the same happy mist. So if you could just take maybe your thoughts on the beach, where it's changing, I think would be silly if we didn't recognize that, and where you think that beach will play into our future. Brian, why don't you go first this time?
Yeah, that's a great question, because obviously we have a ballot question about the seawall, which is, depending on the outcome of that, is going to drive a lot of what we do next. The beach generally, you think Duxbury, the next word that usually comes out of somebody's mouth is beach, especially for those who don't live here. They assume we all live on the beach, and that would be nice. But it's a tremendous resource for not just the animals and the sea life, but for the residents and visitors as well. Whether you go there for the whole day, or sometimes when we'll go out just in the evening to take a bag dinner and sit, and I mean, where else can you go and do something like that? It's really just a treasure. With that benefit, however, come a lot of obligations. The bridge being one, it's being worked on right now. Seems like that's a project that keeps on giving us more gifts in the sense of maintenance. But we need to get there some way, and it's either the bridge or it's going to be the road that we heard about behind the wall. So unless you've got a boat and you're planning on getting to the beach over water, we have to appreciate how we're going to get folks with the stickers out to the beach. But back to your question generally about the beach, it's a barrier beach. And as we know from science class, barrier beaches change over time. And what is it going to look like in 50 years? Who knows? What I do know, having grown up on the South Shore, is I remember Chatham. And years ago, it was, this great place you could drive to, lots of cottages on the beach, and all it took was one storm to change the entire dynamic of that waterway, or that waterfront rather. So we know that nature is going to do what nature is going to do, and there are band-aids we can put on it. But I think long term we need to consider what our relationship to the beach is. In other words, we have Washington Street in the business district and Powder Point and all that. That's all waterfront, but we have the velocity coming from the beach, and the barrier beach, as its name implies, protects Duxbury Bay. So it's an important question. It's a tough question, because a lot of it is what's going to happen long term, and some of it is just unknowable. But in the meantime, I think it's important for us to do what is reasonably possible to preserve this valuable resource that we have. Okay,
Michael.
You got an hour?
No, and I will cut you off, as you know I will. So
no, it's
crazy. Crazy is the word.
I appreciate that it is probably the number one, with also the schools issue in town. And it's probably, I think in the Envision Duxbury, it was probably one or two in there as well. It is near and dear and hard to everyone in the town. And I think that what is first has to be understood is that we don't own the beach. It is Duxbury Beach Reservation. They do a tremendous amount for coastal resiliency. They have plans, they have implemented plans. You can see them as far as the dune nourishments, and they've already built up portions of the beach and gotten awards for that. And they have done a ton to also protect the birds, which we all love to. Not all of them all the time, but it's part of a beach. It's part of what's wonderful about going to the beach is seeing just how natural it is. However, our town appreciates recreation, and we have had to work tremendously hard, I feel like, in the last year, and I think it's been a positive. Maybe not everyone thinks it's a positive, about opening up the communication, opening up the dialogue, because when we work together, things I do feel like will get better. Even in this past 6 months, on the long lines of recreation, having these tough conversations, having the forums that DBR was gracious enough to put together. They didn't have to, they did. They held the forum. We got out a lot of these issues. And as a result, I believe as a result, amendments were made to their permit. And I believe they've been allowed. They've been up on the website as proposed for a number of months. And I think we're doing our best. There are laws that have to be followed with respect to the endangered species. The beach is narrow, it's unique. There are certain things we just cannot do with that beach. But I think opening that dialogue, working together, and getting information out to the community is so important. And I think it will help to allow people to manage their expectations about what recreation will be like for the beach in the coming years, and it might improve it. And I say might, we just don't know how many birds are going to show up every year, what kind of birds are going to show up, where they're going to be, but we're going to try our best. And that's what I have endeavored to do, is to not just accept how things have been, but to say why, just ask the questions, get information out there to try to improve a situation that is very difficult with all of those factors, the federal laws, the state laws, and just the nature of the beach. And I think that's really important. And I really hope that as the years go on here in this next term, that we can improve that relationship and or make it better, even stronger, so that we can all improve what our residents want, is improve recreation and maintaining the coastal resiliency there.
The, trying to stay by the water for a minute. You touched on the seawall. It's been a very hot topic for years, since 2018, when the storm, and I can never remember the name of that storm, but came in and did so much damage. And this year, the board that you are on now decided that it was the town's responsibility to make those repairs, and we will be facing a vote to see if that bond issue, that debt exclusion, will pass. Your thoughts on that? I mean, Brian, why don't you go first, because we've heard from you in the past on it, and we've got a glimmer as to where you're coming from on that, but this is more of a new topic for you.
Yeah, I mean, we have touched upon it a bit through the comprehensive plan and the future of the beach.
Right.
But as far as the vote, I cheerfully defer to the residents as to what they feel, or the voters, what they feel is the appropriate answer on the Prop 2.5 override. We'll work with whatever the outcome is. And I know there are strong feelings on both sides of that question. Over time, in my years in the planning board, while we don't directly issue special permits, we do opine on special permits that go before the zoning board. And many things I've seen come across over the years have been raising, with an S, with a Z, raising up the houses on pilings. A number of property owners on the beach have literally lifted the houses up out of the velocity zone over time. And I know it's not cheap. I know it's not easy. It's a lot of work, but I have seen a fair amount of activity in that area. So there's a certain amount of preparedness that residents are beginning to take out that way. Knowing, again, as I said, nature is going to do what it does. I think even if we build the wall, who knows what 10 years is going to look like down the road, and is it really going to protect the houses? I sure hope so, but we just won't know. So in terms of what should be done out there, I mean, one thing that I could point to is that the zoning bylaw says that whole part of town, like most of the town, is the RC residential zoning district, which requires 1 acre zoning. So you couldn't build out there today the way it's built. So unfortunately, we do have the density that we have. We have to live with that. They're all pre-existing nonconformities. And that just causes more of an issue than if we had, 1 acre zoning out that way from the outset. I would like to see more residents continue along the way of raising the houses up, because first and foremost, you need a roof over your head. And I know there are some rentals out that way, but there are a lot of primary residences. And we certainly don't want to see anybody get washed away. I think one way to avoid that is to lift the house up out of the velocity zone. And I say, as I mentioned, there is precedent for that in this activity that's going on. It's a tough issue because when we're talking about an entire neighborhood of town it's physically disconnected from the rest of town, and I know that there are some strong feelings out at on Gurnett Road that it's kind of like the us versus them. They're very much part of Duxbury. It's literally and figuratively part of the town. It just happens to be a different type of area than maybe those of us who live on the other side of the bridge are not used to. We have our 1 acre zoning in the trees and whatever, and we're not necessarily worried about the ocean. With that said, as you mentioned at the outset, it's an important part of the town's identity. We've had folks living out there for at least 100 years, if not longer, probably longer. And we need to be sensitive to the needs of the folks who are our brothers and sisters in town, and do what we can to preserve their homes. And it's a tough question because this is a very, very expensive project. And I'm no prognosticator here, but I'm just concerned about what happens, 10 years from now. And is the wall enough? I just don't know.
Right. And to follow up on that, because you have had, the ability to speak to the issue, if indeed the vote is not successful, where do we go from there?
It's tough. If it's not successful, I think we have to start thinking about other ways of approaching that wall, repairing it, and also maybe how to protect the wall that is built already, and also future walls. So to make sense of this, I'm just speaking in hypotheticals here. There's other ways of staging walls. You look at Marshfield, for example, they raise money every year to fund their wall. Not though like large amounts that we're talking here. They do pieces, seek grants every year from the Dam and Seawall grant. That's one way to approach it. There's other ways of raising money, as we've done in the past through our matching grant article. And if we had enough in that kitty, potentially rebuilding a portion of the wall or fixing a portion of the wall. There's also a line of thinking and supported by very smart people and experts about beach nourishment, and that works to at least break the waves further out, protecting the homes as long as the sand is there. Of course, the sand moves and things like that, so I don't know how long, just like a wall, that would last, and it's also expensive and scarce in this part of the country. So I think it's a discussion that will need to be had. I think this is not going to go away. And I think we have an obligation, if it does pass, to do our very best as a board to make sure this project runs efficiently. And we've been given an estimate and that to keep it to that, and to keep it as close to that as possible, and also to work with our state and federal government and try to get these to get as much as we can from these grants. Other towns are getting them up and down the coast, and I think that falls on the board. It can't always be hoping that folks in our, that Randy's got a lot of balls he's juggling around every day. I think it's incumbent upon us to ask the questions like, how's the project coming along? How are the grants coming along? Things of that nature, because we owe that to our community to keep driving down that ultimate end cost to the residents.
Well, segue.
Yes.
And we were struck, and as you know, I'm on the finance committee, so we have a lot of conversations about different projects, and and one of the things that struck us about in general and in this particular is that the grants that you speak of, or the grants for anything in town, whether it be seawalls or coastal resiliency or becoming a green community or water safety, anything that we deal with, they're very complex. They're specialized. And right now, the practice has been that either the department heads or someone within that department would try to research and apply for grants. One of the suggestions from, finance committee and from, conversations that we had, is it time to, or is it even the best course of action to include a grant writer or someone that specializes in getting grants? So do we do it based on subject matter? We do it for the town in general. Some towns are actually creating a position for this. And I'd just like to know how you both feel about that. And Brian, your turn. And you're obviously many grants and what you do for a living, you're very familiar with that as a tactic.
Yeah, and the planning board, planning director, and specifically both Chris Ryan, the current planning director, as well as Val Massard, his predecessor, did a fantastic job applying for and receiving.
Oh, this was not a criticism of their efforts.
Oh, no. No, and this is where I'm leading up to.
Yeah.
They're only, that's one portion of what they've been doing. There are, and I keep learning about more and more grants and this money and these pots of gold all over the place, and things that supposedly we're missing out on. I feel very strongly there needs to be somebody running point on grants. And as you've heard just from our conversation so far this evening, we can't put it on the taxpayers, every single thing we want to do here. And particularly with the wall and the beach that are very, very capital intensive. It's going to be, I think, critical for us to have, call it what you want, maybe grant writer position that is somebody, and I don't know, with respect to your question, should it be subject matter? I don't know enough about how the grant writer position would work to say, yes, it needs to be, this type of person or these credentials or whatever. But I do think very much there needs to be if not 100% of the time, somebody who spends a substantial portion of their time pursuing and following up on grant opportunities, because that is one place that we definitely need to beef up on, just because of our needs in town.
We did feel that although grants were told to us that they were available, we really didn't understand the grants. We didn't know what our participation would have to be to get the grants, and which was frustrating because, as you say, there are pots of gold out there. And,
allegedly.
And
yeah.
Well, I think in fact, but it takes an expertise to find them. And we've had this conversation, Mike, but what.
Yeah, and I one of my first thoughts on this was to do it project specific. But the more we started talking about it as a board, especially in conjunction with the wall, is there was a lot more of a consensus that a general grant writer might be the best course of action, especially because there's a lot of different needs from departments that maybe we're just not hearing about as a board. And we want to be supportive of our department heads and and folks that are working for this town, and is specifically Chris Ryan. He's been doing a lot of work. And, you know, this is something that could be carved off, not just for him, for DPW, anybody, the senior center. And I think what I could say is that I think that the town will benefit greatly from this kind of position. Other towns have done it. At least it's something we should explore, see how it can be paid for, maybe even by itself. Some grants, you can pay a portion, you can make a portion of the grant for the grant writer. And, you know, I think that's something we got to think, we have to, as a board, start thinking about in the coming months here, especially with this seawall issue. Issue. It's on the ballot.
Right.
It's a project. And I know that we have some money set aside from us, I think $100,000 that was set aside
Josh got it for us, yes. They
for
have been earmarked for this,
this. So,
but we've had that money and we haven't spent it. And we didn't know we had it.
right.
So that's unfortunate.
So
But I think it's a, that illustrates the fact that these folks are really, you know, struggling with this being on top of their day job.
right.
No question about it.
It's and we have to support them. You know,
Right.
if this is an opportunity we have right in front of us, and we have the dollars for it. And correct, I can be staying corrected here, but I believe Rainey's already put in a
Yes,
motion, putting up RFPs for that. So
right. And I believe that is true as well.
yeah.
But now that leads us into, you know, we've talked about the beach, we've talked about the seawall, we haven't, you know, gotten into all the other things that make the soup, right? But we were, I think, Rainey, and when my remarks to town meeting, you know, we are at a tipping point as far as being able to afford all of these things, whether they be wants, whether they be needs, whether they be passions from various segments. People have a lot of interest, and we are at the point where we are struggling to afford that within the tax levy and growth and grants or whatever other funding source, state, federal. And we will having serious conversations about an override next year. And I know it's, you know, you're both gonna win, so this is good. You can voice in it, but have you given these any thought how you would feel in that? Because we will be starting to work on that, and whether we feel it's a good idea or bad idea, what it would look like and how it would be crafted. Other towns are doing. Hingham's in the middle of an override vote right now. So, you know, Brian, I hate to put you on the hot spot on that, but.
That's why I'm running for the seat. Obviously I need to do more homework on this particular issue. However, I'm not generally in favor of 2.5 overrides. There's a reason 2.5 is in place. With that said, I think if one of the great things about Duxbury is that it's been well managed. And I don't think you'll have folks screaming from the rooftops that we're spending money imprudently. Everything is put to good use, I think. The finance committee, I think, does a fantastic job vetting every proposal and squeezing every penny. And I thank you for that. But at some point, there may be instances where we need to spend more than what we're otherwise allowed by law to do under the tax levy. So without trying to sound like I'm hedging on the question,
It's a difficult question.
You know, I wouldn't want to see a 2.5 override if we can avoid it. With that said, as I mentioned at the outset, there are reasons why people live here. And we have certain expectations of what Duxbury means. And I think as long as we can demonstrate that every dollar, every penny is being spent properly and as efficiently as possible, while I wouldn't want to do this, I think there would be probably less hesitancy for 2.5 override if what we're paying for are things that the town wants and expects and demands. What is that going to be? I don't know. At the very least, we have to keep the roads paved, the roads plowed, the children educated, the streets safe with police, terrific fire and first responder services. I mean, those are all table stakes. We have to have those, and we will. I think when we get to the 2.5 override issue, it's going to be potentially more of the nice to haves. I think, but again, I need to study this more. And it's going to be a question for the residents. It's like everyone else has a budget. You have your household budget. What are your nice to haves and your need to haves? And when we get to that question, we will need to make a decision. But I think that, again, a well-run town is, number one, going to be less apt to have that question in the first place. And number two, when you do have that question, I think you're going to have a fairly reasonable argument to demonstrate why you're doing it, but only as a last resort.
We did have 15 positions that were requested by department heads, not including the schools. And we said no. We had, inflationary pressures. We had labor costs going up. So I think it'll be a robust conversation. And nice to have or willing to give up might be part of it as well. Mike, what do you think?
It is, an override is something that I would really like to avoid. And what I will say is really incumbent upon our board is that we have to start working together and to also help each other out with these issues. Jerry Pisani from your group, and Shannon have all been asking for support. What for financial planning? How the fiscal advisory at town meeting talking about how they wake up in the middle of the night and think about the future. The library trustees catching up to the MAR formula. These are all us issues. It's not just picking on a department or picking, we have to work together to look at the whole picture. And for some of these departments, even a non-essential department, to cut from it would be essentially like cutting the bone. There's really nothing, they're not a big expense. We have to sit down as even the big departments and say, what are the wants? What are the needs? What did we add during after the pandemic? What do we absolutely need here? And if these are wants, let's explain that to the community and say, are you willing to give up this service that you enjoy to avoid an override? And I think that really has to be explained dollar for dollar, position, service for service, and put that to the community. Not just we need $1 million, well, because people just will not understand that. It's another thing to put by dollar and by service exactly what those departments are asking for, and why they believe it is a need, and why it is essential to this community. Because this is a tough ask. We've got we've got what, a $6 million carrying costs on debt every year, so somewhere along that line, for the debt exclusion overrides that we're still carrying. And then we have the DPW, we have potentially the seawall here, and the CPA increase, CPA surcharge. These are all things that have just happened in recent years here. It's really incumbent upon us to work together to address these issues right away in these coming months, and to organize and figure out how we're going to address the solution. Because this is not a January 2024 discussion. This is a now discussion.
And this is just, to Mike's point, this is another good reason, and I think a forward-looking reason to consider the grant writer, because we're looking to take the tax burden off of the taxpayers as much as possible, or not lump more on. If there are other ways to do it, just like CEOs that used to tell me, it's find other places, or do it better, because it's not coming out of the budget, or I'm not getting a bigger budget. We all know that. Don't even, knock on the CFO's door. Same thing here. We do more with less. We'll do whatever we can to do more with less. And if there are other avenues to get funding, I think we should absolutely do that.
Since you mentioned the CPA and the CPA, my son, CPC, close, similar but
Yeah, I don't know
different.
why.
And, that is also on the ballot.
Right.
For many years, when we were one of the innovators on having the community preservation and the 3%. And then when we did have some debt exclusions because of the schools and public safety buildings, it then was reduced to 1%. At the pluses and the minuses of a town meeting type of government. There are not a lot of people there. Article came up, and next thing you know, we're at 1%. And now they're presenting it to us that they would like to go back to 3%. What are your opinion on that? Is it, just a yay or nay? Again, these are things that you've had to think about, and I'm sure you have thought about. So Brian, what, in CPC, where you stand on that?
Yeah, and I've also been a longtime member of the Open Space Committee.
Sure.
So I've had the benefit of seeing how those dollars are spent. And I've been on both sides of the argument on this, at least in my head, over the years. I remember when we were at 3% before the schools were built, or the combined middle and high school were built. And I completely understood the argument back then, which is, look, we've got this override. This is a long-term cost the town's going to have to incur.
And I must say, it's not an override. It is
No, the schools.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay, because everybody keeps calling CPC an override.
No,
It's not an override.
No.
Yeah, it's a surcharge.
So in the context of when it's rolled back
Yes.
from 3 to 1, I understood the proponent's view, which is, look, we're spending all this money on things that are very important for the future of the town. Is there any place we can cut and just give us a little bit of a break?
Sure.
It seemed to make sense at the time to say, you're going to spend 300 over here, and you're going to get $100 back basically over here. All right, fine, I can understand that. I think at town meeting, Holly Morris made a great presentation, a great explanation as to what the effect of that rollback has been over time. And in fact, in today's Clipper, there's a great full-page ad from, I think it was Pat Loring, Kathy Cross, and others, who are colleagues of mine from the Open Space Committee, are very passionate about this, and I think lay out a great case as to why increasing the surcharge, well, again, not looking to throw money at problems, but increasing the surcharge makes sense. And in fact, I think it was Amy and Jamie McNabb had a letter to the editor, I think really hit on the point, which is we're actually getting more money back, or potentially more money back as a whole when we take all the surcharges plus the registry piece, throw it into the pot, and then we have the state match. Not only do we have a higher state match, but then we're all eligible for multiple rounds of funding, which we aren't at 1%.
Right.
So this is, I'm pretty fiscally conservative. This is one of these cases where I think if we really consider what we're paying versus what we're getting in return, that I'm a pretty strong supporter of increasing the surcharge back to 3%. I will happily pay into that because I see what the CPC does with those funds and the matching money. We've preserved acres and acres and acres of open space in town. Lots of historical preservation has happened. Recreation. I mean, all the purposes of the CPC have been provided to the town and then some by our Community Preservation Committee. They're now starved for funds, and I completely understand why. We're having gone down from 3 to 1 seemed to make some financial sense from the residents' point of view, at least at the time of the schools when it happened. But I think that the data will show that, or the data do show that it's harming us. as a town, and the things that we want through the comprehensive plan, if I can harp on that a little more. The things the town, the people who live here value about the town, the recreation, the open spaces, all those things are supported by the CPC, and by restoring the funding to 3% and letting us open up again to the match and the multiple rounds, that those are investments very well made. And I think for the town to not return to the 3% after knowing what the 1% does to us, basically guts any opportunity for further open space acquisition. In fact, we've had to borrow, as you know, on that, and we're into debt service.
Aware, yes.
Right, exactly. And yes, the town wants open space, but there's a better way to do it other than borrowing. And one of the ways, the biggest way to do that is through restoring the CPA to 3%.
Mike?
That was how I was going to start. From a financial end, we've more than got down to the bottom of the barrel with money. We've exhausted it, and we've had to borrow on the last 2 purchases. So it is costing taxpayers dollars, and that would have been avoided had we been at 3%. So it's a huge financial benefit. The cost of land has increased. We've heard that from Holly during our presentations, and we've seen it. If, for example, the Harrington or even the Pink property, these are valuable pieces of land, and to keep them out of the hands of a developer, it costs them money. And to do that, and to do what the residents want, to have their, open space, their walking trails, their ball fields, and to keeping the population pretty stable, this is money well spent. If we start letting tracts of land go to developers, schools numbers increase, needs of police increase. We're not having the dollar for dollar, service for service kind of conversation. We just have to spend money, because that would, that it's just more people.
Betsy, can I just add one point on open space? I want to put my open space cape on here.
Yeah.
But one thing that has been asked over time, and people ask me from time to time, what's the value of open space? Why do we have all this open space? Shouldn't we be, to Mike's point, shouldn't we be developing it and having more tax revenue come in? Well, have that issue or have that discussion on a different day, because it's not one for one, as Mike points out. But one thing that's occurring today that we can all read in the Clipper is the PFAS issue and our groundwater. One thing that open space does, in particular, beyond just being able to enjoy the vistas and walking your dog and that sort of thing, we protect our aquifer. We have a sole source aquifer here in town. We have some of the best water in the state right under our feet, literally. And we've seen that we need to protect it, because from time to time we have either manganese in wells, we have to shut down wells, we have to treat the water. We need to protect our groundwater as much as we can. And one of the huge ways that we do that is through the acquisition of open space. And that's another reason why I think CPA is important, because once you start putting all the puzzle pieces together, I know that folks think of, they're looking at one piece of the jigsaw puzzle or this, but once you put them together, you can see how this all works together, and how preserving our open space and increasing the CPA in order to do that is actually going to preserve one of the most vital things that we provide to the residents, and that's our water.
It's, interesting to kind of follow up on that. Yes, we have, I think 60% of our land is already preserved as open space. And one of the issues that we heard this year was a need for housing, not just affordable housing, or not 40Bs and not high density, but just housing. And the only housing that we get, if someone's paying $800,000 for a lot, they're not going to build something that is a moderate, whether it's affordable or not affordable, or something that either, if you're beginning your journey here or you've been here for a number of years, you don't need 4,000 square feet, you might need 2. And we have heard a groundswell of you know, your former board or for the zoning board to look at what we can do for addressing that as an issue, keeping in mind the points that you've brought up as the balance of open space, the aquifer, but, you know, people do want to live here, and people that have lived here, they don't have a place to go. And the way the cost of land is in town, you have shut that door. And accessory apartments, or, you know, whatever it is. And how do you feel about those conversations? Are they, you know, are they overshadowed by just the need for open space, or do you think they have a seat at the table? That's a tough question.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
No, because we talk about this at the planning board,
Of course
because it's not either or. We need to do both. And I want our firefighters, teachers, police officers, folks who work at town hall, I want them all to live in town. Prosecutors, our county prosecutors. I want everybody to live here. And you make a good point about folks who've lived here in town for many years, who've raised their families. Now the house is too big. Are they all going to go down to the Pine Hills? I hope not. I want them to stay in town. But to your point, our options are pretty limited. One of the things, and this is not going to be a short-term fix, but one of the things the planning board had been looking at, or is looking at in conjunction with the comprehensive plan, is the zoning in town. As I mentioned earlier, most of the town is 1 acre zoning. It's the RC district. Should we have other types of districts that allow maybe more cluster type developments? And if so, are those appropriate for septic? I mean, you get into lots of specific
Sure.
site issues. But yeah, there's certainly an appetite for that. And I would love to keep our seniors here. I mean, we have a terrific senior center right down the street.
Mhm.
I would like folks to not have to drive, 20 miles to get here. They can, take the Gatra bus from someplace in town. So it's certainly not an easy fix. If it were, it would have been fixed a long time ago.
True.
In the short term, one thing that at least we at the planning board have been pushing as a potential alternative or short-term fix is when we have 40Bs come through, even though the planning board isn't the issuing authority, I've challenged every developer to do more than the minimum. So they'll come in and they'll tell us, you need affordable housing. And I agree. I say, yes, you're right. So why are you only building the minimum? Do more than the minimum.
Right.
And then they usually push back and say it's uneconomic, or there's some excuse as to why they won't put more affordable units into development. But that's a fix that can be easily made, I think, if developers think about the community as a whole, rather than maybe what they're going to make off of the development and they move off into a different town and do another project. I would love to see accessory apartments used as accessory apartments as opposed to, B&Bs or short-term rentals or that sort of thing. That's an issue for another day. But when you need to take care of mom and dad, and we can do that now under the zoning bylaw. It has to be within the existing building, but there are opportunities through zoning, absolutely, to address that issue. But as I say, it's not something we're going to fix tomorrow. That's a long-term issue.
Mike?
At the risk of sounding like I'm telling or advising our Affordable Housing Trust how to operate, there are a bunch of projects that are, or lots that have been purchased. There are ongoing projects. They do a great job with the projects that are executed. I'd like to see them execute more and to get those projects completed. We do have a great planning board. We do have a great select board and great community involvement on what types of units we'd like. There is this demand for senior housing, and there's also opportunities with these 40B developers too. It's always a the 40B developer. Well, we could buy down a unit, in a 40B, for example, on Railroad Ave. Comes in and they say they want to do 20 units and only 4 of them are going to be affordable. That's how they have economically figured this out. What's to say we can't use some of our money from the affordable housing to buy down a unit, to add another affordable unit to it. I think it's a conversation that should be had on some of these occasions, and it might allow a empty nester to stay in the community. But I would like to see more of these projects completed. that we've had up in the air for a number of years. I
agree.
think that's a good way to address it.
All right, we're winding in there. We're coming down to the end of this. And I'm going to combine a couple of questions. It's the role of the select board. I think that the role of being on a select board in Duxbury has changed dramatically over the last generation. You know, we now have a strong town manager. We have become more professional in how we do things. It's gone are the days where the select board, you know, hired and fired and truly ran the town. What do you feel as far as your role going forward should be your top priorities? What are your top 3 priorities in joining the board based on the fact that you are now more of a board overlooking a corporation as opposed to the person that is implementing those decisions as much? So, you know, Mike, why don't you take this one
Sure.
first?
This has been something I've really focused on from the very beginning, is to be transparent and be a good communicator. I think that a lot of folks in town don't even, or sometimes in many towns, don't even know who their select board is, and what they do and what's going on in their town. I think it's incumbent upon us to communicate in any way possible with social media, through PAC TV and all these other great opportunities to let people know how they can learn about what's affecting their lives.
What are your top 3 priorities?
That's transparency and communication is my number 1.
Okay.
And that's where I'm going with that.
Mhm.
That's top priority. The second top priority is it's not sexy, but it's about it's our finances, it's our wallets. At the end of the day, people are worried about paying their bills, making sure their kids can go to college, or if they're on fixed incomes, just going to the grocery store. We talked about this before with overrides and debt exclusions and everything else. It is really, really important that we sit down and we crunch the numbers, and we work with wonderful volunteers that care a lot about our town's finances and assist as much as possible in our role. That's number 2. And the third is something I've really enjoyed, with communicating with folks, and that's quality of life issues. I'm at an age, and my children are in school, and my ball fields. People really, there are a lot of wants that come through CPA and community preservation funds, and might come through fundraising. Whatever we can do as a board to encourage improving quality of life for people, whether it's sidewalks on Washington Street, whether it's a ball field somewhere down the road, or you name it. Those are issues that I would love to get into once we get through the crunching the numbers in. I think it's important. People pay a lot in taxes. They're paying a lot in their mortgages to live in this wonderful town. I'd love to keep working with our residents and our town departments to improve things such as recreation on the beach, and other quality of life things that people are really excited about talking to me about.
Okay. Right.
So my wants are what the town's wants are. It's not what Brian wants at the select board. And one thing I just want to be clear on is, and not to make it sound too corporate, I don't want Rainey to have 5 bosses. The board acts through its vote as one voice. And while we all have different perspectives, and I don't say we, I haven't been elected yet, but as the board has different perspectives, I don't know what the other members' interests and concerns are. I want to learn those so that everybody's got great ideas. That's why they're on the board. And I need to more fully appreciate what the other concerns on the board members are. For me, I see the role as almost a board of directors overseeing a CEO, if I can use that analogy. I think Rainey does a terrific job running the town. there's a lot to it. I certainly wouldn't want his job. And if I were in his job, I certainly wouldn't want 5 different people giving me 5 different sets of instructions. So I want to answer your question. I mean, I want to be careful about approaching any sort of agenda because it needs to be done collaboratively, to Mike's point.
Mhm.
The one thing in particular that I think could use some emphasis, and with my hopefully soon-to-be colleagues on the select board in support, I would be very interested in seeing more attention paid to implementation of the comprehensive plan. And it's literally a spreadsheet that just goes on and on and on and on and on for different boards, committees, departments to work on action items. It's literally a project list. So I think since the select board is the one board in town that oversees everything, we tried it at the planning board, but that really didn't work. I guess for lack of a better term, didn't work because we didn't have authority over other boards, and certainly they have other priorities, and I get it. I'm going to advocate for implementing the comprehensive plan and not to get it done tomorrow, but just to have a steady, reasonable forward movement on it. So that would be my one particular issue, but more importantly, I want to see the town continue to be run in a fiscally conservative way and very livable. We talked about the beach at the beginning of the conversation.
Right.
We talked about the great schools, all the things that people come here for. It's not that I want to champion something new. I want to see those things continue. And we need people to step up to do the work to make those things happen. Just as I said before, we have shoes to fill. People did lots of great things to make this town what it is in the past. And I just want to do my part to shoulder the burden going forward to make sure that continues.
That's great. Any final remarks other than get out the vote, get down there and make sure you show up on Saturday and vote?
Yeah, don't blank me, please. We have a little, like, we're counting blanks. No, my family's here now, so I do want to thank them. They do share the load, and I know they miss their dad a lot. So
So they say.
They say they're probably having a lot of fun. But I certainly am gracious to them for allowing me to do this. And I'll tell you, it's an honor to be on the select board. I really enjoy it. And I'm looking forward to another few years here.
Brian?
Thank you.
Final remark?
Yeah, I mean, what an honor and privilege, because you think about the history of this town. And at 1637, we were incorporated just a stone's throw from Plymouth, and just the rich history that we have here at our fingertips, and the long line of people who have come before us on the select board. I mean, it's really, when you think about it, just awe-inspiring, at least for a municipal geek like myself, as to what we're the successor to in terms of municipal lineage, so to speak. I sincerely appreciate if everybody would come out and vote. I know that other than the wall, it's not a presidential election with folks really amped up to come out, but I feel that it's a privilege. I mean, it is a privilege to write, a privilege, and I would like to see folks exercise that. We live in a country where you can go out and shake your fist at City Hall and cast your ballot. I'd like folks to cast their ballot, as Mike says, hopefully not blanks, for the select board, but it's important that we all participate in our community. And on a related issue, there are a couple of open seats on the ballot, and I'm a little concerned about that as a voter.
Housing Authority.
Housing Authority has 2.
Right.
Planning Board has 1. And to me, that telegraphs, well, number one, that everybody thinks everything's okay, which for the most part it is. But to me, it's also a bit of a cautionary tale that there's maybe a little bit of complacency in the town, because it's what you make of it. And I would like to see, and this goes back to why you should come out and vote. Not only should you come out and vote, but fill out the talent bank form and volunteer for the town. I think you'll get a different appreciation for what goes on in our sleepy little bedroom community. It's not just commuting to your job and coming back. There's a lot that goes on under the hood, so to speak. And the more people who are taking an active role in doing that, I think even better our town will be for it.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen,
Well,
and thank you for running we appreciate you donating your time to the town.
So
Happy to do
you
it.
do an
All
excellent
right.
job too, so thank you.
Some days are better than others. All right, good night. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for all coming.